Hi everyone, my name is Shelby and I'm an educator here with BEMP. And today we are going to be going through our River of Change lesson, our part one called Rio Bravo, and we are going to learn what the river and its bosque looked like 2,000 years ago. So let's get started. So our first thing is I want to know what you think of when you hear the word bosque. And to give you some background, bosque is a Spanish word for forest, but it's not just any forest. It is a very special forest. And this forest is near a river. And in this case, it is near the Rio Grande River in New Mexico. So if you look at this graphic here, you could see that the river is right down the center here. And then we have our bosque on either side, which is kind of this green space, which is made of trees and other plants creating our forest. So I'm going to show you two pictures, and this is the first one that was taken in 1930 by an aviator named Charles Lindbergh. And I want you to analyze it real quick. Just look at what you notice about it. Look at the shape and the landscape of it, and just the overall photo. So we're going to spend just a second doing that. And this photo is a more recent photo that was taken. So now you're going to do the same thing. You're just going to analyze this photo, look at the shape and the landscape of it. What do you notice about it? So now that we have the two side by side, I want you to kind of compare the two. And what do you see that is similar between the two of them? And what do you see that is different? And what do you think happened to the Rio Grande and its bosque to make it look like the more recent photo? And we're going to explore kind of the first photo right now, and over these few lessons we're going to be learning more about what made it look like this recent photo. So now what we're going to do is we're going to build a model of our river and our landscape in New Mexico and see different parts of the ecosystem. So to do that, we need to create our ground and our landscape for the river and the bosque to grow in. So to do that, we are going to start with the Sandia Mountains. So the Sandia Mountains are a part of the Rio Grande Rift Valley, and they are called Sandia, or a Spanish word for watermelon, for the pink color that they turn due to the granite and potassium in the rocks. So if you are in Albuquerque, what cardinal direction are the Sandia Mountains in? And something that can help you is by looking at the compass that we have here in the top left corner, and that will kind of guide you on which direction the Sandia Mountains are in. So our next thing that we're going to be looking at is the mesas. And what does mesa mean in English? So mesas are tall and flat like a table, which is how they get their name. And did you know that there are also inactive volcanoes that are near the mesas? Again, if you are in Albuquerque, what direction are the mesas? Something that can help you with that is they are opposite of the Sandia Mountains. So you could use that compass again and see which direction the mesas and volcanoes are in. So now we're going to get to the birthplace of the Rio Grande River, and that is the San Juan Mountains in Colorado. When the snow melts in the spring, more water moves into the Rio Grande, and if we're looking at our compass, it is in the north. That is the direction that Colorado is in from New Mexico. So when the snow melts in the spring and the water is moving down, it moves down this valley. So this is an example here, and it shows mountains on one side, mountains on the other side, kind of creating this bowl shape. And in this bowl shape, there's a low point here. And as the snow on top is melting, it's going to flow right down into that bowl and settle on the bottom, forming that valley and the river there. So that's what is happening with our Sandia Mountains and our mesas in Albuquerque. It's creating that valley. So now we have a place for our river to go, and our river is the Rio Grande River, and it is the largest river in New Mexico. It is 1,885 miles long, and seasonal flooding changes the shapes and the path of the river. So flooding is just when there's a lot of water moving through the river, and it flows over the banks and wider than it normally would. And so that would happen oftentimes when the snow would melt because more water is coming down the river. So now we have our best place for the river to flow in New Mexico. We could see where it ends. So it ends in the Gulf of Mexico after its long journey through New Mexico from Colorado and also through Texas and Mexico. And then it ends down in the Gulf of Mexico. So we could see on this next one here, we have Colorado, New Mexico, Texas, and Mexico. And it starts up in the San Juans in Colorado, travels all the way down through the center of New Mexico, and then borders Mexico and Texas all the way to the Rio Grande, or all the way to the Gulf of Mexico. So before we get started, and we're kind of thinking about the shape, this kind of leads back to the pictures that we looked at the beginning. And I want to know what shape you think the river will be after the snow melts and starts to form a river. So in the wintertime, we have snow that is packing and starting to build up. And then in the spring, it starts to get warmer and then it starts melting and flowing down that bowl shape and into the valley. So once it's down into the valley and in the river, what shape do you think the river will be? So we're going to look at this quick video, and it's going to show us what the shape kind of looks like depending on the land. So here we have our water that I'm going to pour in. And I have the land textured similar to how it would be in New Mexico and just the ground here. So you could see that the river actually goes in many different directions. So it has different streams flowing through it. Some of them are connecting, some of them are splitting off. And it creates this kind of braided shape. And that braided shape and that wandering curvy shape is called a meander. So it created some very distinct features when the water flows through there. The first one that we're going to be looking at is called a sandbar. So in sandbars, they form in areas of the Rio Grande where there is swift moving currents that slow down and deposit sand and clay. So they create islands and nesting sites for many birds like Canada geese, and they provide a safe place to raise young far away from predators like coyotes. They also provide sandy and moist and sunny soil that cottonwood seedlings need to grow. So here you can see kind of an example of what a sandbar would look like. So the river is flowing down and it is splitting there, creating that V shape on one end, but on the other side it is depositing sand. It's putting sand down in more of a curved shape, and that creates our sandbars. Our next thing is an oxbow lake. So an oxbow lake is the result of a meander, or those curves in the river that continues to erode and deposits sediment along the banks, forming a horseshoe shape. So there's a few words in there that we should go over first, and the first one is erode. And erode means for water that is moving, it slowly is cutting away at the sand, and it is carrying it down with it. So it's taking it away from the edge of the river and moving it downwards. And then deposit just means that it places it somewhere. So it places that sand that it's carrying in a different spot. So eventually the river erodes so much that it creates a new channel and cuts off the oxbow, forming a lake. So if we look at this graphic here, we can see that these red areas represent erosion and the yellow areas represent areas that have been deposited. So on the inside of our horseshoe shape here, you could see that it has been eroded away and will continue to erode away as it gets that bigger curve in it. And it starts to deposit a little bit of sand on the inside of the bend, right on that C shape. And eventually, these two pieces that are eroding will meet up because the water wants to create a straight line, the easiest path to take downwards, and that is to just cut that off and create this oxbow lake. So you'll have these kind of C-shaped lakes that form as a result of the erosion. And our next thing we're going to look at is sandy banks. So these sandy banks form when sediment is deposited onto the outer edge of a meander. So on the outer edge of that bend, there's going to be some sand that gets placed there that the water has been carrying. And these areas are sandy, they're sunny and moist, which is great for cottonwood seedlings to grow. And these are also great places to go and maybe have a picnic and just play around on them because they're kind of like little beaches. They're very fun. And we also have ponds. So our ponds and our wetlands form when the river floods and then it leaves behind water. So the river is going to flood, like we talked about, it's going to go over the normal riverbank. And then as the year goes on, that water is going to keep moving downwards towards the Gulf of Mexico. And so it'll end up going back to a smaller shape. And when it does that, it leaves these little ponds behind. And these ponds provide habitat for many plants and animals further away from the river. And plants like cattails grow here. And also animals like ducks and cranes love to take shelter here in the water. And we also have grassy meadows. So our grassy meadows, they contain one of the largest families of plants. Wildlife feed on the seeds, roots, and leaves in these grassy meadows, and they grow in very different environments. They grow all the way from uplands near the mountains to wet marshes in the sun or in the forest where it is shaded, maybe near the river. And they have many birds, mammals, insects, and reptiles. They love to find food there, and they also shelter there. So some examples of grasses that grow in these grassy meadows are salt grasses and blue grama grass. So before we go any further, I want to talk about a special word that we're going to be talking about a little bit further on and throughout the rest of these lessons, and that word is riparian. And that means it is something like a plant or an animal that is along the river margins or banks. So if we look at this graphic here, you could see in the middle, there's a stream or the river, and then we have plants right along the edges. And the plants, or even the animals, anything that lives right near the edge of the water and in the bank areas of it, that is the riparian zone. So they are things that need the water and they have to be near the water to survive. So other things like these plants that are up here on the top of these hills, they don't rely nearly as much on water as these plants that are lower down right near the edge of the stream. So now what are we doing? We are missing some things on here. We don't only have these just small landscape things. We are missing a lot of plants. So let's go through some plants that we have. So we are going to start with cottonwoods. And our cottonwoods are going to be our seedlings, our first ones. And what we're going to do here is we're going to read some information about the plant. And there's going to be a little piece of, a little graphic here that is going to be placed on our model. And it's going to tell us how many we should be placing on our model. So let's get started. So with cottonwood seedlings, so it says, I am a small cottonwood tree and I have just begun to grow. I need a lot of sunlight, moist and sandy soil to survive. I grow well on sandbars and riverbanks. As I mature, my roots will stabilize the soil and my leaves will create shade for other plants. Soon I will provide food and shelter for wildlife such as birds, insects, reptiles, and mammals. Place me where I have bare, sandy soil with lots of sunlight and moist soil. So let's see where those would go. All right, so I have placed some near the banks. Like we said, these sandy banks here are very sunny, very sunny, moist, and sandy areas. So those are great for our seedlings here. And I also put some right in the center on the sandy bank as well. So we have a total of 36 seedlings right now on our model. And now we're going to start having our cottonwoods grow up. So now they're going to be in their teenage years, which is called a cottonwood sapling. So I am a cottonwood sapling. Out of the thousands of seeds that sprouted, I made it. Some seedlings washed away, while others were eaten by insects and couldn't reach enough water to survive. I provide shelter and food for wildlife. Since I am still a young tree and not very big, it is easy for beavers to chew on my trunk. They see me as a tasty snack to eat. Beavers also use my sturdy wood to build their homes. Place me along the river in the bottom of the valley floor where my shallow roots can reach the water table. And it says place 6 saplings in replace of the seedlings. So before we had little clumps of 6, but now we only have clumps of 3 that have grown, and that's because not all of them survive. So before we had 36 sapling or seedlings, now we only have 18 saplings. And now we have adult cottonwoods. I am an important native tree in the bosque. My leaves are heart-shaped. I provide shade for the plants below me, as well as food and shelter for much of the wildlife found along the river. Hawks and owls build their nests in my canopy, and porcupines love to hang out on my branches. Did you know that porcupines and beavers eat the green leaves and tender branches? Place me along the river in the bottom of the valley floor where my shallow roots can reach the water table. And place 6 cottonwoods in replace of the saplings. So now we only have 6 cottonwoods, 6 adult cottonwoods. Some of those saplings might have gotten eaten by beavers, or maybe they didn't get enough water, or another plant outcompeted them. Something happened to them so they weren't able to all grow. So we only have 6 adult cottonwoods. So here's a question for you. What are some things that might prevent a seedling or a sapling from becoming an adult cottonwood? Now that we have our adult cottonwoods, what can they do to increase their population? Can they just get up and run away? Can they reproduce? Can they die? Can they ask people to plant more trees? Which one do you think they can do to increase their population? And the answer is they can reproduce. So how do they do that? They have cottonwood seeds. And if you have ever seen the cottonwood fluff during the springtime, it kind of looks like it's snowing here in Albuquerque. So if we look at this quick video here, you can see what that looks like. All of these cottonwoods are just producing this fluff. And in this fluff that you can see down, even in this photo, they're carrying seeds along with it. So it's producing seeds and they're getting carried through this fluff in the wind. And that can be spread almost everywhere. So now that we have our adults here and they can reproduce, we're going to have something happen in the river. So like we said, in the wintertime, we have snow that is packing in the mountains in Colorado. And they could also be packing on mountains here in New Mexico, like the Sandias. And in the springtime, it's going to get warmer and that is going to melt. That snow is going to melt and go down into the valley, creating a flood. So this is what our flood looks like. It is very different from what it was before. So we have a wider river here that has gone over the edges of the previous riverbank. So now we have our flooding, and there's some features here that might change. So we are going to be looking at these sandbars. We have 2 sandbars that are circled and also a grassy meadow. So what do you think will happen to these features that are circled during this flood? So they will they will stay in the same place. B, they will get covered with water. Or C, they will get washed away and settle another place. What do you think? They will actually get washed away and settle to another place. So those sandbanks were eroded away and the water carried that sediment somewhere else and new sediment came by and settled it along the edges of the banks here in totally new spots. We still have our cottonwoods that stay there because they're adults and they can withstand these floods. They have their roots that are really hooked down into the ground, so they're good, but the sandbars or sandbanks have changed. And now that we have our flooding and we have our new sandbanks, during that same time in the spring, the cottonwoods are also going to start producing their seeds and start producing that cottonwood fluff that flies through the air. So we have our cottonwood flying, our cotton flying that's carrying the seeds throughout the air, and it's going to settle in certain locations. So it settled down on some banks, but now that it's just flying through the air, it really can settle wherever it can. And so we have some areas here that have started to grow along the banks, but we have one here that has started to settle right in the middle of the river. So those ones will get washed away. They will not be able to make it past their seedling stage, if they even get to that seedling stage. So those ones are going to go away, and the ones that are along the edges of the riverbank are good, and they are going to stay. So they've been able to grow into some cottonwood saplings. So now we have some saplings in here as well, along with our adults. And just like before, something might happen in our river. So it takes these trees quite a long time to grow. They live almost 100 years. So in that time for them to get to adults, there's a few years in between there. So we had that flooding went back down because as the year goes on, the flooding will lower as it gets back to winter time and the snow is starting to pack. But as it does that, it's going to change shape almost every single time that it does it. So our river changed shape here from what it was before, and let's look at some features that may have changed. So these group of saplings here have been just totally taken over by the water, and they might have gotten washed away, or they just totally drowned in the water. So those ones are going to go away. We also have this group out here, and they are too far away from the water. So they won't be able to get enough nutrients for them to be able to survive. So those ones are going to be out. So we only have 3 groups of saplings that are left. And another year has gone by. The adults have produced more cotton and have created more saplings. So now we have saplings growing, we have some seedlings growing, we have some adults that are still alive. All of these are going to be growing simultaneously, which is kind of why that last part was just like a lot of things happening at once. It was just seedlings were growing and our saplings were growing at the same time that the adults were producing cotton. So that would happen every single year. And again, every single year we have our river flooding. So we have another flood in the next year, which is going to knock out some of these seedlings that have been growing and change the shape of some of the features. Like the sandy banks here, they're going to change. We have maybe some different oxbow lakes that might change. There's going to be some shift every year with this flooding. Our flooding has receded like it does throughout the year and left behind some new oxbow lakes, some new ponds, and some of our saplings have grown up into adults, which has made some new areas of adults here. And also they've produced some new seedlings and have grown into some new saplings. So we're constantly having those 3 stages of life in our cottonwoods growing all at once. There's always going to be cottonwoods, seedlings, there's always going to be saplings and adults growing simultaneously at the same time that the landscape is flooding, the flooding's receding later in the year, and we have our cottonwood that is being produced during the springtime when it's generally flooding. So, are cottonwoods the only plants in the bosque? I don't think so. So let's look at other plants that are grown in the bosque. So one of the plants that grows here, or it's a group of plants that are called native riparian shrubs. So remember that riparian word is something that needs to live near water, either a plant or an animal that lives near water. And a shrub is kind of like a bush. It is a smaller tree. It's kind of like a middle layer of trees. So they grow in moist areas where their roots can reach the water table. and you can find me along the river, on sandbars, and along the ditch banks. Did you know that beavers love to eat riparian shrubs like coyote willow? Another example of these shrubs are New Mexico olive. Place me along the bosque where I can find enough water and shade to live. So on the left here we have a coyote willow, and on the right we have a New Mexico olive. So let's place 5 riparian shrubs on our model. So I place these near water. Some of them are near the edge of the riverbank. Some of them are near ponds or our oxbow lakes here. We also have cattails, and our cattails kind of look like a corn dog to me. I think that's what they look like a lot. So they are an important plant that lives in the bosque in some of the wettest areas. Not only do they filter and clean water around the ponds and marshes, but they also provide habitat for many animals. If you look and listen for red-winged blackbirds, there are frogs and dragonflies, and you could see all of those in the bosque around these cattails. It says, place me around ponds and sandbars, as well as on riverbanks. I need water for most, if not all of the year. So let's place 8 cattails on our model. So now we have our cattails that are placed throughout here that are all near the water. We have our riparian shrubs here and our 3 stages of adult cottonwoods. And we also have upland shrubs. So upland shrubs, which are, again, shrubs are like those little trees or bushes. And these ones, it says, I am a native shrub that grows in arid regions of New Mexico. The little moisture I need, I get from rainfall, and the sun doesn't bother me a bit. Since I live in such arid environments, I provide much needed shade for wildlife like lizards, snakes, and rabbits. And some examples of these are cactus and sagebrush. Place me far from the river on the mesas and in the dry washes of the Sandia Mountain foothills. So let's place 5 shrubs on each side of the river. So we have 5 up here in the Sandia Mountains, and we have 5 on the mesa. So one thing that I would like to point out is if you look at this cottonwood tree that is further away from the river, how does it survive? How did it even get there? Have any of you seen that there are cottonwood trees far from the river here in Albuquerque? Some might be on the other side of Coors, which is pretty far from the river in some areas. Some might be near Old Town, which is definitely a little bit further away from the river. And those, how do they get there? And that is from that flooding. So if we look here of this map of Albuquerque, we have I-40 running along the top here, and this is Coors right here, with the river flowing right down the middle. So this is a current photo, but I had drawn some lines on here through Old Town and along the west side of the river, and that kind of shows a historic flooding area because Old Town used to flood. There used to be some areas over on by Coors that used to flood. And that is how wide the river used to get when that snow was melting from the mountains and going downwards. So it used to be much wider than it was before. And this is a good way to kind of visualize how wide it used to get. Is it used to go past Old Town and in some areas past Coors here too. So there's lots of areas where you will see cottonwoods and kind of remnants of that flooding. So I have a few questions now that we've gone through all of the plants. And our first one here is, would an upland shrub be able to survive in the bosque? Why or why not? Would a cattail be able to survive in the mountains and the mesas? Why or why not? Now, let's put on some animals. We don't only have plants, but we also have animals to create our full ecosystem. So let's add some animals in here. So I've gone through and added quite a few animals, and let's just quickly go through some of them. So this over here is a cicada. We have porcupines, some silvery minnows, a roadrunner, a northern leopard frog, a grasshopper or cricket, some Canada geese, a coyote, a bald eagle, and some lizards. So these are all animals that live in and around the bosque, and some of them can go back and forth between the upland areas and the bosque, like the coyote and the roadrunner and the lizards. They can kind of go back and forth between which ones they want to be in at the time. But others, like the leopard frog and the Canada geese, they have to live near the water. So those would be considered riparian animals. So now let's look at this image of kind of all of the plants put together. So we have our cottonwoods that are really tall. We have our shrubs, our riparian shrubs, which could be these coyote willows. And we also have some plants that grow right on the floor. And these ones right here are actually called yerba mansa. So what do you notice in this picture? Look at the levels of plants. Are there distinct differences between each level? So there are actually three very distinct levels in this image here. On the top are cottonwood trees. They produce our canopy. Those are the very tallest layer. And then under that, we have our understory, and that are those riparian shrubs. The coyote willows, the New Mexico olives, things like that would create that understory. And then the very bottom layer would be that ground cover. So that yerba mansa would all cover that. Some of those grasses would all cover that floor of the forest. So now we're getting back all the way to the beginning, and we're going to be looking at these photos one more time. So how are these pictures similar and how are they different? What do you think happened to the Rio Grande and its bosque to make it look like that? So before our next lesson, what I want you to do is look outside for one of the pieces that we placed on our model today. It could be the cottonwoods or any of the animals that we put on there, anything like that. I want you to try to find one of those before the next lesson. And also look for something that exists now that may have affected the river and how it looked 2,000 years ago. So it does not have to be living 2,000 years ago, something different. So how can it have affected something 2,000 years ago with what it looked like? And that's what we'll be focusing on in our next lesson, is how the river got to be looking like it does now. So thank you for bumping with me today and going through our Rio Bravo lesson. And I'm super excited to see you in our next lesson called the Rio Manso. See you then.